the way that I look at the 2010 map, and I've thought a lot about this, and Ron has as well, is that in the West, Republicans have what I call a Patagonian latte problem. Patagonian latte problem, which is this. The kind of folks that care a lot about the environment, that are secular, that see the Republican Party as a Tom DeLay, George Bush, Sarah Palin, religious conservative party, but the kind of folks who want balanced budgets, who want good public schools, who, you know, on the weekends don't go to church, but instead they put on their Patagonia fleeces and they go and hike around the mountains or the fields. Like, that is, I think, and especially among that demographic, among women, you know, it makes it very tough for Republicans to win in places like Colorado, but especially on the coast. Look at Washington, Oregon, and California. Look at Chris Dudley. This guy was a really good candidate for the Republican Party in Oregon. Basketball player for the Trailblazers, Ivy educated, moderate, running against a former governor in a change year who was, you know, definitely somebody who was from the past and was definitely, he was older as well. Dudley could not crack 30% in the county that surrounds Portland. You can't win statewide in Oregon if you cannot crack 30% in Portland, in Multnomah County. So they have, I think, a serious issue there. The Republican brand, for whatever reason, and I think it's a mix of the environment, of religion, and of just sort of the general perception towards them, has not recovered out in the West like it did in the heartland and even parts of the Mid-Atlantic and the South. So I think that's a lingering problem. Taking that into account, you keep, obviously, California, Oregon, and Washington. You probably keep New Mexico and Colorado and Nevada. You probably put Arizona into play then too, because again, a lot of Hispanics moving into there. Look at the New York Times today. Look at the numbers around Phoenix. Hispanics taking off in the Phoenix area. A lot of Californians are bringing their centrist, center-left leanings, leaving California, moving to places like Arizona. I think Arizona comes onto the map. So it's going to be tough for Republicans, given their challenge among white upscale voters and their lingering issues with Hispanics in the West. So that gets to Ron's point, which is maybe you can lose in Ohio, lose in Indiana, and still win this thing if you keep the interior West and if you're able to hang on to a Carolina or a Virginia. I mean, I think it's very possible that this election could come down to those two states once again, Carolina and Virginia.
That's Charlie, a question. I thought that was a really interesting quote, maybe a pretty profound quote from Mark Kirk right after he won. He's talking about, as I said, he did quite well. He won because he did better than you would expect in those suburbs of Chicago. Same thing with Toomey and Sestak, where Sestak actually did better than Obama, working class, white, Western PA, but drastically underperformed in the immediate Philadelphia suburbs, which Obama won by 200,000 votes and Sestak won by 20,000 votes. Kirk said, you know, for most of the past 20 years, really since Clinton, these white-collar suburban voters have been social moderates first and economic conservatives second. And that in this election, they flipped.
That's a great point.
That's
flipped.
exactly right.
That's
exactly right.
So the question is, can you nominate someone who can allow them to stay in that alignment, or do you give someone who kind of presses the cultural buttons that Jonathan talks about, and once again, you're looking at a 150,000 vote deficit in the 4 counties outside of Philadelphia?
Well, Ron, I actually believe that whoever comes through our nomination process will have focused on the economic issues and the role of government and tying all that together effectively. Now, it's almost certain to be a Republican nominee who is conservative on the social issues. I mean, we don't have anybody running that's not, at least as of now. So I do not expect us to lead on those issues. And what you saw in most states with that group of voters was they were upset about the economy and began to be afraid about debt, deficits, the health care bill, and those kind of things. And parenthetically, Larry, you're going to have a hard time holding on to those young voters, even the young white voters, because they're the ones who are the most out of work, and all of a sudden they're going to realize they're going to be forced to buy health care if things stay the same and the courts don't act on the Health Care Act. So, you know, that's why I said in the beginning, if the economy gets better, he's very difficult to beat, because that'll get those folks back thinking about green energy or some damn thing instead of and instead of whether their kid has a job.
All of us in this room understand that polling this far out means virtually nothing because it's all name ID. Let's spin the clock forward a year from now. What 3 or 4 Republicans do you see emerging? Not just the ones that are at the top now, but because of their strength, their positioning, their savvy, their ability to run a campaign. What are the ones you think this crowd should keep an eye on? Charlie, you want to start us and we'll just go down the line?
Well, it's, again, we don't know who all's running, and you've got some very high-profile people who, if they run, would be players. We know for sure that Romney's running, Pawlenty's running, and Gingrich is running. And I would guess Haley is running, but he hasn't told me that, and I don't think he's made a final decision. But you don't know about Palin, Huckabee, or Daniels. Huntsman could be a player. He's got a tricky path here in entering the race. The first couple of months of his campaign will determine whether he's a player or not, because it's a little bit tricky to step out of the administration and into the Iowa caucuses. But you know, maybe he's got a plan to do it. I admire him and think he would be a good president, but that's a tricky one. But you have all these other people, Ryan. Michelle Bachmann, just as Jonathan wrote that Rick Santorum could be a big factor in Iowa, Michelle Bachmann could be a big factor in Iowa, and even sort of elbow Rick aside. I assume Ron Paul will run again. If Ron Paul runs again, he's got a constituency in every single state. You know, 12, 15, some places 20%, and that skews the rest of it. So the answer is, I don't know. I would guess a year from now we'll be sort of in the middle of the primaries, and Romney will be a player, and Newt will always be a player. It's hard for Newt to go the distance, in my opinion. But he's a huge presence in the race because of his ideas and the way he presents them, and he will do well in debates. And baggage aside, he's going to be a big factor in the race. Beyond that, it depends on who's running.
Larry, what's your sense?
I actually will just go ahead and let these guys comment. If I could understand the inner workings of the Republican primary mind, I might be a whole different person. But why don't these guys know a lot more?
I bet you're still wrestling with the inner
Make a lot
workings.
more money, yeah, for sure. You can do both. Dick Morris, right? You do both. Double dip. Obviously, you have to include Romney on the list. I mentioned earlier the prospect of Romney facing 3 different opponents or 4 different opponents in the first 3 states. He's sort of the person that you can see being a factor in all 3 of those states. I'm not sure who else, right now at least, would be an automatic factor in each of those 3 states. Beyond that, let me just first start with Iowa because I spent some time there this week. If you look at the caucuses going back to 1988 when a televangelist from Virginia Beach by the name of Pat Robertson came in 2nd place and beat a sitting vice president, George H.W. Bush, there's always been a 25 to 30% space. In Huckabee's case, it was actually higher than that, but about 30% space for a Christian conservative figure. It was Robertson in 88. In 96, Buchanan got 23%. Dole only won the state by 3% that year over Pat Buchanan, and that really helped set Buchanan on a path towards New Hampshire that year where he beat Dole. 2000, if you combine Alan Keyes and Gary Bauer, you get a quarter of the vote. Again, it's the same lane that they were taking from. And then, of course, in 2008, Huckabee wins by 9% on the backs of evangelicals, where exit polls showed 60% were born agains. So who fills that 30% lane? You know, my take is that Santorum right now is doing a lot of the hard work to try to make a play for it. I think he has a shot. His challenge is he's not in the moment. The battles he fought were in the Clinton era, in the George W. Bush era. Yes, he's been on Fox, which helps him as far as name ID, as far as face recognition. The challenge is talking about partial birth abortion battles with Barbara Boxer in 1997 is not talking about battling back Obamacare. Who can do that? Charlie mentions Michelle Bachmann. I think if Bachmann gets in the race in Iowa, that could be a real bad sign for Santorum because you would then have that split 30%. So I think you're going to have a person coming out of that lane in Iowa, that traditional cultural conservative lane, what happens to them after that, I think remains open. Huckabee was hurt by lack of money in organization after Iowa. Don't discount Romney in Iowa, though, because he lost to Huckabee last time. But look at what he did in eastern Iowa, which is less evangelical, more Catholic. He did actually pretty well there, won a lot of those counties along the river. He is somebody who I think he's downplaying it now. He's trying to really poor mouth it with us in the press, but I think he could actually still have a shot there. I think looking beyond that, it's so tough to look in the crystal ball. Haley appears like he's going to run. If he does, he will have a lot of money and a strong organization because of his years working in national politics. I think as sort of a regional favorite, he would be a player in South Carolina. Add up what Huckabee and Fred Thompson did there last time, you can see the sort of regional factor still does matter in South Carolina. Bush was a Texan, obviously, in 2000, but he was the closest thing there was to a Southerner in that race at that point in 2000. So I think you have to include Haley at that point. And I mentioned this earlier, Pawlenty is really going after that downscale vote, too. And I think if Huckabee and Palin are not in the race, you could see him being a real factor in Iowa and even beyond that in New Hampshire and South Carolina as well. Huntsman, I think, is looking hard at New Hampshire, the hope being the McCain 2000 model, which is you get upscale Republicans and then you get the Democrats who for some reason are playing in the R primary along with a lot of independents who are similarly upscale on the seacoast and down in the Boston suburbs and in some of the college towns. So I think that's sort of his model. I think it's something of a bank shot right now because of what Charlie said. He's got a really interested in that question coming out of the gates about how he served in the Obama administration, but I think he could be a factor there. And beyond that, I think we're talking about folks like Mitch Daniels or Sarah Palin who have not made certain yet that they're going to run, so I will leave the speculation there.
Thanks. Well, like I said, I think the overwhelming fact, the big fact, is the fragmentation, and that there is no figure who is, of the scale that we have seen of previous frontrunners. I do wonder. I was thinking as you were talking, is Michelle Bachmann Alan Keyes in heels? And I also think that
Great image.
Rick. I also think that Rick Santorum faces the challenge that, by all indications, the man-on-dog threat has somewhat receded in the 10 years since he's left Congress.
He brought it up, though.
Yeah, he brought it up again. Yeah,
Sioux City, yeah,
he's
unapologetic about it.
still flogging that. All right, so I think you have to look at it again by lane. I think Mitt Romney is clearly the strongest competitor for that kind of traditional white-collar, more managerial Republican. I think that Mitch Daniels would be a formidable competitor to Romney for those votes, and I think Huntsman could be kind of an irritant more at the moment than a full-scale threat. And I think that again, it matters how much that is divided up. And I think the big uncertainty is who is the favorite in the other lane. I think both Haley Barbour and Tim Pawlenty, on paper, have potential to be formidable candidates because they have some crossover appeal to both groups in the party. The one who might actually really fill that space, and I suppose this is not some kind of body image joke. The one who could really fill that space is Chris Christie, because I think that on the one hand he has kind of a bearing that makes him credible to the upscale Republican, but he is going after government with the passion that the blue-collar Republican and Tea Party Republicans